My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 78 years old, a retired school cafeteria cook from a small American town called Maple Glen. And for 50 years I fed other people's children with the same hands that raised my son Daniel. I have arthritis in my knuckles, a garden that still grows tomatoes sweeter than anything at the store, and a history stitched from quiet sacrifices I never made a fuss about, until the day my daughter-in-law told me to eat outside because guests were coming. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? It happened on a Sunday evening when the house smelled like rosemary chicken and lemon pie. My recipes, my oven, my home that I helped pay for without a word of complaint. Lila stood in the doorway to the dining room in a cream blouse with those sharp little shoulders, hair twisted in a perfect knot, lips pressed like she was holding secrets that gave her power. She looked at me the way people look at a mess they're too busy to clean. "Evelyn," she said, "the guests are almost here. Would you mind eating on the back porch tonight? We don't have enough seats at the table." You felt that in your chest too, didn't you? For a second, I didn't understand the sentence, like it came from a radio station I'd never tuned to. On the porch. My porch. The porch where I'd rocked Daniel to sleep in a squeaky chair when he had colic, where I patched his jeans and mended his heart after the first girl broke it. I pointed to the table I had polished and set, the plates I'd bought in the fall sale, the napkins I'd ironed. There were 6 chairs, 2 at the ends for along the sides, room if anyone bothered to make room. "I can take the little chair from the hallway," I said, my voice softer than I meant. "I don't need much." Have you ever tried to keep your voice from shaking even when the bones of your memory are rattling? Lila smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. "It's not about space," she said, and now her tone had sugar on top of steel. "It's about atmosphere. We invited Pastor John and his wife, and Mark from Daniel's firm, the partner I told you about. It's a professional dinner. It needs to feel curated." She glanced at my cardigan like it was a mistake in a painting. "We'll bring you a plate after dessert. Do you see how the oven warmth can turn into frost without the temperature changing at all?" I looked down at my sweater, the mint green one with pearl buttons I bought 2 winters ago because it matched the Christmas lights, and I felt suddenly loud in my own home, like I'd become a clashing color no one wanted. I thought of the pie cooling on the counter, the little fluted edges I'd crimped with my fingers, and it felt like I'd baked my own rejection. I asked, "Where is Daniel?" Because if a boy grows up at a woman's table, doesn't he speak when his mother is asked to leave it? But the hallway only answered with the sound of his expensive shoes moving away. Have you ever watched love take the shape of footsteps retreating? "Please, Evelyn," Lila said, but there was no please in it. "We don't want to make this awkward." She kissed the air near my cheek, careful not to smudge her lipstick, and whispered, "It's just for tonight." Then she lifted my plate and set it on a tray like I was a room service order scheduled to vanish. How many "just for tonights" does it take before you realize it's become always? The porch light buzzed. It was early summer, so the air felt like a damp cloth, and the cicadas sang the way they always do when a person is trying not to cry. I sat on the wicker chair that creaked under old memories and watched my dinner table glow through the window. Candles lit, crystal water glasses catching the light, the good napkins folded like swans. My spot at the head of the table was empty. My fork, the one with a little nick where I'd tried to open a jar last Thanksgiving, waited like a dog who didn't understand why it had been left behind. I pressed my lips together and tasted salt. Have you ever sat outside your own life and watched other people enjoy it? The front doorbell rang. Lila moved with a dancer's grace, her face blooming into the kind of smile she never gave me. Daniel's laugh floated out, the one he uses for men who hold his paycheck in their pockets. I heard my son say, "Make yourselves at home," and the room did exactly that without me. The words split my chest like a seam, because the home had chosen its guests, and I wasn't one. What would you do if you were asked to make yourself small in the place you built large? The tray on my lap held a perfect plate I'd prepared: rosemary chicken, roasted potatoes, green beans with slivered almonds. I ate slowly so the night would last long enough for me to understand it, and I kept my back straight. I've learned that dignity is posture when the world tries to bend you. The chatter inside grew warm and thick. Someone praised the pie, Someone else laughed at a joke Daniel used to save for me. I set the clean fork down and clasped my hands to keep them from shaking. And then the sound that changed the night came. Not from the doorbell, not from the table, but from the hinge of a memory I'd been careful not to open. Have you ever heard a memory creak like a door? I stood up, went to my bedroom, and pulled the shoebox from the back of my closet, the one with the faded lid and the rubber band that had grown tired with age. Inside was an envelope yellowed at the edges, addressed to me in the tidy handwriting of my old lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, who had a way of making paper feel like protection. The date on the letter: 18 years ago, the year Daniel and Lila married, the year I let myself believe I'd be taken care of in my old age. I didn't open it yet. I just held it and felt its weight the way one weighs a choice before it is made. Can a thin piece of paper carry the weight of a life? I walked back to the porch with the envelope and slipped it under my cardigan. The guests inside lifted their glasses to a toast I couldn't hear. My porch smelled like basil and memory. My heart hammered, not from anger, but from a clarity as crisp as the autumn mornings when I used to stand in line at the faculty lounge coffee pot, thinking about the kids who would come through the lunch line with stories in their eyes. I reached for the porch door. And right then, as I touched the handle, Daniel turned toward the window and caught me watching. He looked away. Do you know the pain of being seen and ignored at the same time? If I tell you the next part straight away, you won't feel the full weight of this moment. The gravity that pulled me from the porch into the past where everything that led here was set into motion. So let me rewind and show you how a woman can give and give until people start confusing her generosity for permission to erase her. Will you come with me to the beginning? When I was 30, I was a widow with a little boy who thought the moon belonged to us because his father used to point to it and say, "That's our nightlight." Daniel was 4 when the factory accident took his daddy's laugh out of the house. I worked double shifts in the school cafeteria and sewed hems for teachers on weekends. I learned how to stretch a chicken into soup that lasted 3 days. I learned how to be both gentle and unbreakable. Isn't it incredible what you can do when there is no other choice? We lived in a small rental with peeling paint and a furnace that rattled like a distant train. Every dollar had a destination before I even earned it. On nights when my feet hurt too much to stand, I sat on the floor and practiced tying Daniel's shoes so I could show him how to do it in the morning like it was magic. He grew up on casseroles and bedtime stories, and I grew into a woman who didn't ask for help because help had a habit of arriving late. Have you ever taught yourself to be a lighthouse because no one else knew how to keep the lantern lit? I promised myself we would own a home one day. Not a dream house, just a safe house. I saved in an old coffee tin at first, then in a proper account when I could manage it. 12 years after the accident, I signed the deed on the little white house on Sycamore Street with a porch I loved more than any room. My name, only my name, was on that paper. I cried in the parking lot because the pen had felt like a crown. Do you remember the first time a key in your hand sounded like the word belonging? Daniel grew into a tall young man with a hungry mind. He earned a scholarship, and I filled the gap with overtime and lunch lady smiles to people who didn't know they were buying my boy a future with their pizza slices. He brought home Lila in his junior year, a pretty girl with straight A's and straighter opinions. She had the kind of confidence that made furniture feel like it wasn't arranged right. At first, she was kind in the way people are when they're auditioning for a role. Do you know how kindness can be a costume? I remember the first time Lila corrected me at my own stove. "It's more modern to do the beans blanched and sautéed," she said, taking the wooden spoon from my hand like a baton in a race I didn't know I was running. I laughed then because what else does a woman do when a child tells her how to cook her own recipe? Seemed small. I told myself it mattered to her because she cared. Tiny cuts don't bleed right away, do they? After the wedding, pretty and expensive in a way that matched her, Daniel and Lila moved into an apartment in the city. They visited on Sundays, laundry baskets in their trunk, and I didn't mind because I liked the smell of my boy in clean shirts. Lila would rearrange my living room just to try it, and I would put it back when they left because I knew where the sun hit best. When their lease ended, they asked if they could stay with me, just for a little while to save for a down payment. I said yes because what is a home for if not shelter? A little while became a year. A year became 3. Have you ever noticed how temporary can look permanent if you squint? I paid the property taxes from my pension, and they paid the cable bill. Lila brought in a glossy magazine table that didn't match my wooden chairs and said, "We're modernizing the look." My porch became their smoking break. My pantry became a place where things I needed moved to higher shelves I couldn't reach as easily. These were not crimes. These were rearrangements. But rearrangements can be acts of conquest if no one says stop. When is the right time to say stop? Then came the talk of refinancing when the roof needed replacing. "We'll put our names on the deed," Lila suggested, casual as sugar in tea. "It's only fair if we're paying." I heard the word fair and tasted something bitter. I went to Mr. Whitaker, my old lawyer, and asked him to explain things slowly. He said, "Evelyn, you're generous. That's your strength and also your risk." He drew up papers that put the house into a living trust with me as the trustee, Daniel as the beneficiary after my passing, and certain clauses that would keep me safe should family dynamics shift. It sounded like rain on a tin roof. Uneasy but necessary. I tucked the envelope into my shoebox where I kept the important parts of my life. Do you have a place where your backbone is stored on paper? Time turned like pages. Lila's suggestions became instructions. Don't use that towel, it's decorative. Don't leave your teacup on the table, it leaves rings. Don't archive those photo frames. The house feels dated. My house. Dated. I adapted to keep peace the way old wood flexes when the humidity rises. The day I found my late husband's toolbox in the donation pile, my hands shook as I pulled it back. Lila said, "We need space for things that serve us now." I think my face must have told her something because she backed off. I learned then that boundaries only appear where someone draws them. But who wants to be the woman who draws lines in a home meant for hugging? Do you know what it costs to pick up the pen? So when Sunday came with its bouquet of rosemary and lemon, I had already lived 100 small goodbyes to respect. I just hadn't expected the door to the porch to become the border of my worth. Back there in the present, with the porch light buzzing and my dinner cooling, I slid my fingers over the envelope under my sweater and felt courage lick at me like a flame finds a wick. It wasn't anger that rose. It was clarity. Clarity sounds like glass when you tap it. It doesn't shout, it rings. Have you ever felt a decision solidify in your chest until it changed your posture? Inside, laughter swelled. I heard Daniel's voice, warm, charming, speaking a language I taught him, hospitality. Only now it spoke over me. I took a breath, smoothed my cardigan, and opened the porch door. Lila caught me immediately, her smile freezing like water midair. "Evelyn," she whispered, stepping forward. "We agreed, but I hadn't agreed." And complied. Those are different verbs, and that night I relearned all my verbs. Do you know the second a verb in your life changes tense? "I need a word," I said, not to Lila but to Daniel, who stood at the head of the table I'd set. He looked at me the way you look at a puzzle piece that doesn't belong in the box you bought. Behind him, Pastor John's wife stared at her lap, and Mark from the firm raised his eyebrows like he'd stumbled into a scene he could retell later. "Mom," Daniel started, soothing and practiced. "Not now." That was when I placed the envelope on the table runner, right between the candles. Paper can be louder than a shout if you choose the right moment. Can you picture how every eye went to that thin rectangle like it was a ticking sound beneath the centerpiece? "Later," I said, tapping it with my finger so softly it hardly made a sound. "You and I will read this together. And then we can decide where I eat in my home." I turned to Lila and added gently, "And how many seats belong at a table?" My voice did not break. Neither did I. But something else did. The script of the evening, the choreography that had me waiting on my own porch. Have you ever cut into a performance and watched the actors forget their lines? I stepped back to the porch and sat, hands in my lap, spine straight, letting their dinner continue with my sentence lodged in it like a bone in a throat. Fireflies blinked in the yard as if copying the candlelight's rhythm from inside. I thought of the first day I brought Daniel home from the hospital wrapped in a soft blue blanket, and I whispered to the yard, "I didn't raise you to forget me." The yard answered with wind through the maple leaves. Nature never forgets who plants and waters, even if people do. That truth steadied me like a handrail in the dark. Isn't it strange how silence can speak in full paragraphs when you finally listen? Voices rose and fell. Chairs scrape. Maybe they tried to swallow my sentence. Maybe it stuck. I didn't go back in until I heard the clink of dessert forks and the polite chorus of satisfied guests. When I entered again to fetch my slice of pie. Yes, the pie I made. Lila met me with a smile stretched so tight it might rip. "We'll handle the kitchen," she said, like it was a jewel she didn't want me to touch. I held her gaze, and here is a thing I will admit. I felt sad for her too. Sad for a woman who believes control is the same thing as safety. It isn't. Control locks the door. Safety invites people to sit. Do you think she'll ever learn the difference? I carried my pie to my bedroom, the one place the house still whispered my name. I closed the door and sat on the edge of the bed where the sunlight in the mornings made a square on the quilt. I slid the letter from the envelope. My eyes caught the first line, regarding the living trust of Ms. Evelyn Carter, and the sentence that followed wrapped itself around me like armor. The trust granted me absolute authority over residency, occupancy, and use of the property for the remainder of my life, and no refinancing or title modification could occur without my written consent. The words sat on the bed beside me like old friends who had been waiting for me to call them. Isn't it something when the past you protected finally stands up to protect you back? I put the letter away, not because I changed my mind, but because I had decided to do this with the same dignity I'd used to raise my son. Not at the table, not before guests, not in anger. Morning would be better. Morning makes truth sound like a song instead of a siren. I turned off the light, and in the dark I could hear the dishwasher humming and Lila's heels tapping and Daniel's low voice asking if something might be wrong. I lay back and stared at the shadow of my ceiling fan and thought of all the women who tuck away documents, dreams, and proof of their worth in shoeboxes, waiting for the right season to open them. Maybe this was my season. Are you ready to see what happens when a woman finally opens the box? I didn't sleep much. At dawn, the house was quiet except for the tick of the hallway clock. I brewed coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in and set 3 cups on the table. One for me, one for my son, one for my daughter-in-law. I put the envelope in the center and folded my hands. When the bedroom doors opened, their faces were puffy with sleep and surprise. "Sit," I said, and they did, because some words come out of a mother's mouth with the gravity of years. I could feel the day shifting, like a ship turning toward a different shore. And just as I reached for the envelope to begin, a car door slammed outside. Firm, purposeful. Tires on gravel. Footsteps on the front walk. Someone was coming up to my house at 7 in the morning, and I knew exactly who it was, because I'd made a phone call in the thin hours when the house breathed and plans are born in quiet. Would you like to know whose shadow reached the glass as the doorbell rang? If this opening hit your heart, and you want to know who knocked at dawn, and how I turned a porch plate humiliation into quiet, healing power, like this story, drop a comment with the word respect, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The doorbell rang again, sharper this time, cutting through the hum of the morning like a blade through silk. Lila and Daniel glanced at each other, confusion creasing their faces, because people didn't usually show up unannounced at 7 in the morning unless something was wrong. But nothing was wrong. Not yet. Something was simply about to happen. I rose slowly, not because I was weak, but because I wanted the moment to stretch, to taste every second of it the way you sip the first coffee of the day. My cardigan slid from my shoulders like I was shedding the night. I opened the door, and there stood Mr. Whitaker himself, 82 years old now, hair as white as the envelopes he carried. His spine bent like the question mark people mistake for fragility. But his eyes, those were courtroom eyes, sharp and unblinking. He stepped inside with the quiet confidence of a man who knew paper could move mountains if folded right. "Morning, Evelyn," he said, voice gravelly with age and maybe a little amusement. "You ready to do this?" "Do what?" Lila asked, her robe tied tight, mascara smudged under her eyes because she'd gone to bed angry. People don't sleep well on nights when they sense the ground under them might shift. She glanced at Daniel like he should have answers. He didn't. He looked at me, the way a son looks at his mother when he realizes he might not know her as well as he thought. "Let's sit," I said, motioning to the dining table, the same one that last night had hosted laughter I wasn't invited to join. This morning, it held 3 coffee cups, the envelope, and now Mr. Whittaker's leather briefcase that clicked open like a gun cocking in a western. "Evelyn," Daniel started, voice careful. "What's going on?" I looked at him, really looked at him, the way you study the face of the boy you raised and the man he became. His hair was thinning now at the temples, his jaw tighter with years of ambition, but there was still a trace of the child who used to run to me with scraped knees. I wondered when that boy had stopped running toward me and started running toward everything else. "What's going on," I said softly, "is that I'm tired of people confusing my kindness for permission to erase me." Silence. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Whittaker slid the papers out and began explaining in his deliberate courtroom voice. He spoke of trusts and occupancy rights, of clauses that had been signed and notarized long before Lila learned how to curl her hair just so. He read aloud the sentence that made Lila's face drain of color. "No party, including heirs or future beneficiaries, shall exercise control over the property during the lifetime of the grantor without her explicit written consent. In simpler words, my house, my rules until the day I leave this earth." Lila opened her mouth, shut it, opened it again. "So what are you saying?" she managed, though her tone said she already knew. "I'm saying," I replied, folding my hands on the table, "that last night was the first and last time I'll be told where I can or cannot sit in my own home." Her eyes flicked to Daniel, but he wasn't meeting her gaze. He was staring at the table like maybe he was seeing it for the first time, really seeing it. The scratches from his toy cars when he was 6. The burn mark from the casserole I'd set down too hot one Thanksgiving. The table wasn't just wood. It was history, and he was realizing he tried to rent out history for an evening of small talk and promotion opportunities. "Mom," he began, but I raised my hand, not angry, just steady. "You let her tell me to eat outside," I said. No tremor in my voice. Just fact laid down like bricks. "You let her treat me like a guest in my own home, Daniel." He swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed like it was caught on a hook. Lila recovered first because people like her always do. "It was one dinner," she said, aiming for a laugh that didn't land. "We were trying to make a good impression. Don't you think you're overreacting?" Overreacting. The word slid across the table like a snake. I thought of every overtime shift, every patched-up shoe, every night I skipped dinner so Daniel could have seconds. And here sat a woman in a silk robe in a house she didn't own, sipping coffee from my cup, telling me I was overreacting. Mr. Whittaker cleared his throat. "Mrs. Carter isn't overreacting," he said dryly. "She's exercising her rights. Rights, I might add, that extend to who lives here, under what conditions, and for how long." That got their attention. Lila sat straighter. Daniel finally looked at me, eyes wide. "You wouldn't," he whispered, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. I didn't answer right away. Sometimes silence is the loudest thing in the room. "Daniel," I said at last, "when you were 12, we almost lost this house because I was behind on the mortgage after the school cut my hours. I prayed so hard my knees hurt. When we kept it, I promised God this place would always be a home, not a battlefield. Last night, it felt like a battlefield." His face softened then, just a fraction, like maybe he remembered the nights we ate soup 3 times a week so the house payment never slipped again. Lila leaned forward. "What exactly are you planning to do?" I looked at her. This woman who wore ambition like perfume, strong enough to choke a room. "What I should have done a long time ago," I said. "Set boundaries." I stood, smoothed my cardigan and added, "You have 30 days to find your own place." The words fell into the room like stones into water. The ripples showed on their faces. Shock, disbelief, a flash of anger on Lila's, confusion on Daniel's. "You can't be serious," Lila said, her voice rising. But I was. I turned to Mr. Whittaker. "We'll need the formal notice," I said. He nodded, already pulling another set of papers from his briefcase. Daniel finally found his voice. "Mom, where will we go?" I met his eyes. "You're a grown man with a good job. You'll figure it out." Then softer. "I figured it out when I had less than you do now." He flinched like my words hit a place he didn't want touched. Lila pushed back her chair so hard it screeched. "This is insane. After everything we've done here." "Everything you've done here," I cut in, "was while forgetting whose roof kept you dry." She glared at me, but I didn't look away. Some wars are won by holding eye contact. Mr. Whitaker slid the official notice toward me for signing. My hand didn't shake as I wrote my name. Evelyn Carter. A name that had raised a son, paid off a house, buried a husband, and learned finally, to stop apologizing for taking up space at her own table. When I looked up, Lila was already on her phone, probably texting her mother or a friend about the crazy old woman who had lost her mind. But I hadn't lost anything. I was about to reclaim something. And just when I thought the morning had given me all its surprises, there was another knock at the door. Louder this time, urgent. Daniel went to open it, and when he did, the color drained from his face. Because standing there in full uniform was Officer Grant, the same officer who, 20 years ago, had helped me when a neighbor tried to claim part of my property line as his own. The man had retired, then come back as a volunteer deputy because, as he put it, the town still needs a spine now and then. And apparently so did I. "Morning," Officer Grant said, stepping inside. "Got a call last night from someone saying there might be a domestic dispute here. Thought I'd swing by." His eyes landed on me, steady, respectful. "Everything all right, Ms. Carter?" I looked at Lila, whose mouth opened, then shut. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. I smiled slowly, feeling the weight of the signed notice beside my coffee cup. "Oh, everything's fine, officer," I said. "We were just about to discuss some living arrangements." And as Officer Grant nodded, tipping his hat toward me like the old-fashioned gentleman he was, I realized the next 30 days were about to change everything in ways even I hadn't planned for. Because Lila wasn't going quietly. If you want to see how Lila fights back, and how I make sure this house stays mine till my last breath, hit like, drop a comment with my house, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. Officer Grant stood there, boots planted on the welcome mat like a tree that had seen storms before and wasn't afraid of another one. The morning light spilled through the doorway, glinting off his badge. His presence shifted the air in the room, suddenly tighter, charged, like the moment before thunder cracks across a summer sky. "Domestic dispute," Lila repeated, voice dripping with disbelief, though her fingers twisted the belt of her robe until it looked like a tourniquet. "Who would call that in?" I said nothing. Some truths ripen on their own time. Daniel cleared his throat. "Officer, we're just having a family discussion. Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. And maybe Officer Grant, with his eyes that had seen too many small-town dramas and property line wars, could feel it too. He nodded slowly, his gaze moving from my son to Lila, then landing on me with the kind of respect men save for women who've earned it without demanding it. "You sure you're all right, Miss Carter?" he asked, voice even. I met his eyes. "I'm fine," I said. "Better than last night." Lila snorted softly like I was being dramatic, but she didn't say anything because something in my posture told her this wasn't the day for it. Officer Grant tipped his hat. "Well then, I'll leave you folks to it. But," he paused, letting the word hang like a hook, "if you need anything, Miss Carter, you know where to find me." He stepped back onto the porch, the screen door creaking shut behind him. The sound seemed to echo. Maybe it was just in my head, but it felt like a warning bell. Because Lila's face had changed. It wasn't just anger now. It was calculation. She sat down slowly, like a queen reclaiming her throne after an interruption, and folded her hands on the table. Her eyes moved to the official notice beside my coffee cup. "So," she said, voice steady but tight, "you think you can just throw us out after everything we've done here?" I raised an eyebrow. "Done here." Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her, but she barreled on. We paid for upgrades, she said sharply. We bought furniture. We fixed the plumbing when it broke last winter. With my money, I reminded her, my voice calm, almost gentle. Every reimbursement went through my account. Every repair bill had my name on it. She flinched just slightly before masking it with a bitter little smile. You know what people will say, Evelyn? That you kicked your own son out. That you let some old grudge ruin your family. I leaned forward then, my elbows on the table. You told me to eat outside in my own home because your guests were too important to share a table with me, I said softly. If anyone wants to talk about what ruined this family, we can start there. Daniel rubbed his temples like the words were nails tapping inside his skull. Mom, he said finally, voice low. Maybe we can work something out. A compromise. Lila's head whipped toward him, eyes blazing. Compromise. She's treating us like tenants. That's because, I said evenly. You are. The words landed like a hammer. Silence thickened the air until even the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate before ticking again. Lila stood suddenly, her chair scraping back so hard it nearly toppled. She grabbed her phone off the counter with a kind of speed that said war, not retreat. Who are you calling? Daniel asked, frowning. Someone who knows the law better than that relic you dug up, she snapped, jerking her chin toward Mr. Whitaker, who had been quietly sipping his coffee like he'd seen 100 women like her try 100 different tricks. He didn't even blink. Call whoever you like, he said mildly. The paperwork will say the same thing no matter how many names you drop. But Lila was already dialing, her nails clicking against the screen like angry little hammers. Daniel looked torn. His loyalty caught between the wife whose ambition burned too hot and the mother whose quiet strength filled the room like rising water. And me. I just sat there, calm as a church pew, because I knew something Lila didn't. That trust document in the shoebox. It had layers she hadn't even begun to peel back. While she paced the kitchen, muttering into her phone, I let my mind wander back over the years. Every casserole, every overtime shift, every birthday where I stretched pennies into presents. I thought about how generosity can become a leash if you hand it to the wrong person. And I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. Done apologizing for existing in the home I built. Done shrinking so someone else could play queen in my kingdom. Done watching my son forget the woman who kept the roof over his head when the bank came sniffing around all those years ago. When Lila hung up, she looked triumphant. My cousin's a lawyer, she said. He'll be here this afternoon. We'll see what he thinks about all this. Mr. Whitaker chuckled, low and warm, like a man hearing the setup to a joke he already knew the punchline to. By all means, he said. Invite him over. I haven't argued with a fresh-faced attorney in years. It might be fun. Lila glared at him, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes now, like maybe she'd felt the shift in the room too. 'Cause it was shifting. I could feel it in my bones, the way you feel a storm before it breaks. This wasn't just about last night anymore. This was about every box of my memories pushed into closets to make room for their things. Every family photo moved off the mantel because the frames looked dated. Every time I bit my tongue to keep the peace in a home that had started to feel less and less like mine. No more. I stood, smoothed my cardigan and said, invite whoever you want. We'll all be here. Then I looked at Daniel, really looked at him until he shifted under the weight of it. Your father, I said softly, worked himself into an early grave for this house. Don't you dare forget that while you sit here letting her treat me like a guest in it. His face crumpled just a little, like the boy I raised was still in there somewhere under all that grown man pride. And for the first time since this all started, Lila didn't have a comeback ready. She just stood there, gripping her phone like it was the only weapon she had left. But I had something better than weapons. Had the law. I had the deed. And before this was over, I was going to have my house back in every sense of the word. Because if Lila wanted a war, she'd just declared it on the wrong woman. And war was something I knew how to win. If you want to see what happens when Lila's fancy lawyer cousin shows up, and how I turn every card back in my favor, hit like, comment Team Evelyn, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. By noon the air in the house felt heavy, like the walls themselves were waiting to see what would happen next. I had brewed a second pot of coffee, stronger this time, because I knew battles like this required energy. My hands didn't shake when I poured it, though my heart was beating with the steady rhythm of someone bracing for impact. Lila was dressed now. Tight black skirt, white blouse, hair pulled back so sharply it looked like it hurt. She paced the living room with the confidence of someone who thought backup was coming to save her. Every few minutes she checked the window, heels clicking like gunfire across the hardwood. Daniel sat on the edge of the sofa, elbows on his knees, looking like a man caught between two lives. He hadn't said much since breakfast. Maybe he was thinking about the letter, the lawyer, the eviction notice ticking down the days like a bomb in the corner. Maybe he was thinking about me telling him this was the last time anyone would push me out of my own home. And maybe, for the first time in a long time, he was realizing I meant it. The doorbell rang at 12:30 on the dot. Lila nearly sprinted to the door. "Finally," she muttered, yanking it open. In walked a man in a tailored gray suit, hair slicked back, smile sharp enough to cut glass. He carried a leather briefcase and the kind of arrogance you could smell before he spoke. "Cousin Rick," Lila said, kissing his cheek like he was the cavalry itself. "Thanks for coming on such short notice." He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on me with a flicker of curiosity before settling on the envelope and documents spread across the table. "So," he said smoothly, "this is the situation." "This," Lila said, pointing at me like I was the defendant in a crime, "is my mother-in-law. She's trying to throw us out of the house we've been living in for years. We've invested money here, time, everything. And she's acting like we're strangers." I raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. Sometimes silence makes people fill the air with words they'll regret. Rick opened his briefcase, sliding out a pad of paper like he was about to cross-examine the entire house. "Well," he said, "let's see what we're working with. Surely there's some leverage here. Common law tenancy, equitable interest, something." Mr. Whittaker cleared his throat from his seat at the dining table. He hadn't moved much all morning, just sat there calm as a church bell, sipping his coffee and waiting. "Leverage only works," he said mildly, "if the other side doesn't have ironclad paperwork." Rick shot him a look. "And you are?" "Her lawyer," Mr. Whittaker said, setting down his cup. "For over 30 years. Rick smirked like that was cute. "Well, laws change. Times change. Maybe your documents are outdated." Whittaker slid the trust papers across the table like a poker player laying down a royal flush. "This was updated 5 years ago. Notarized. Filed with the county. Every clause airtight." Rick scanned the first page, then the second. His smirk faded just slightly, like clouds moving over the sun. "Even so," he said after a moment, "if they've been living here, contributing financially." "Under her permission," Whittaker interrupted. "Revocable at any time. Explicitly stated." Rick looked at Lila. "How much have you contributed?" She hesitated. "Well, the furniture, the curtains, some repairs." "With her money," I said quietly. Lila shot me a glare sharp enough to slice through bone. Rick kept reading, his brow furrowing now. Page after page. His pen tapping against the table like maybe he was hoping the clauses would rearrange themselves into something useful if he stared hard enough. Finally he closed the folder. "Legally," he said slowly, "she can ask you to leave." Lila froze. "What?" Daniel looked up sharply too, like he hadn't expected to hear it said out loud. Rick cleared his throat. "The trust gives her full authority over occupancy. You have no ownership rights here. No tenancy rights either, since there's no rental agreement, no payments." "Legally," he shrugged. "It's her call." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Lila's face went red, then white, then something in between like a storm cloud rolling through. "So that's it," she snapped. "She just gets to kick us out." 30 days, I reminded her gently. Lila turned on Daniel then, fury snapping in her eyes. "Say something." This is your mother, she's throwing us out. Daniel rubbed his jaw, looking 10 years older in the span of 10 seconds. Maybe, he said slowly, we should have our own place anyway. Lila stared at him like he'd just spoken another language. Excuse me. He didn't look at her. He was looking at the floor, the walls, the ceiling, the house that held his childhood, his memories, his mother's sacrifices. Maybe he was seeing it all differently now, the way people do when the ground shifts under them. You heard him, I said softly. Maybe it's time. Lila grabbed her purse off the counter like it was a weapon. This isn't over, she snapped. I sipped my coffee, steady as ever. Oh, I think it is. Rick packed up his briefcase without meeting her eyes. He knew a lost case when he saw one. But Lila, she wasn't done. Because as she stormed toward the door, she turned back with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Fine, she said. We'll go. But you might want to check the mail this week, Evelyn. Some surprises take a little time to arrive. And with that, she slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I didn't know then what she meant. But I was about to find out. If you want to see the storm Lila's about to bring, and how I turn every one of her tricks back on her, hit like, drop a comment with Team Evelyn, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The house was quiet after Lila left, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of quiet that settles in before a storm, thick and restless, like the walls themselves were bracing for what came next. Daniel sat at the dining table, staring at the trust papers like they were in a language he didn't understand. Mr. Whittaker packed up his briefcase slowly, the way men do when they know they've won the first round but expect another fight coming. And me. I stood by the window, watching Lila's car tear out of the driveway like it hated the gravel under its tires. I didn't like that smile she gave me before leaving. It wasn't surrender. It was promise. Mom, Daniel said finally, his voice low, almost hoarse. Do you have to kick us out? Can't we just start over? I turned from the window, studying my son. This man with tired eyes and a tie thrown over the back of his chair. This boy I once carried on my hip through grocery stores when I had $20 to feed us both for a week. Start over? Asked softly. Daniel, last night I was told to eat on the porch like a stray dog. In my own home. After years of giving, paying, raising, surviving. How do you start over from that? He didn't answer right away. His shoulders slumped like maybe the weight of it was finally pressing down. Lila was wrong, he said at last. But she was upset. Trying to impress people. That's just how she is. And you? Asked. He flinched. I didn't stop her. I know. The clock ticked loud in the silence that followed. Finally, Mr. Whittaker closed his briefcase with a snap. You've got 30 days, he reminded Daniel gently. That's more kindness than most would give. Daniel nodded, eyes on the table. I'll talk to her, he murmured. We'll figure it out. But I wasn't so sure. Because Lila wasn't the type to let go. She was the type to scheme in silence, to call lawyers and stir gossip and make plans that smelled like smoke before anyone saw the fire. And sure enough, 2 days later the first letter arrived. I found it in the mailbox wedged between a coupon flyer and the electric bill. The envelope was expensive looking, heavy cream paper with gold lettering in the corner. Harrison and Cole, attorneys at law. My stomach sank, but my hand stayed steady as I opened it at the kitchen table. Inside was a formal letter accusing me of unlawful eviction threats and emotional distress, demanding I cease all actions to remove Daniel and Lila from the property or face legal consequences to the fullest extent. I read it twice. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was desperate. When Mr. Whittaker saw it an hour later, he chuckled too. They don't have a leg to stand on, he said, sliding the letter back into the envelope. Empty threats. But noisy ones. Noisy indeed. By the weekend, Lila's version of the story was spreading through town like dandelion fluff on the wind. At church, I caught whispers in the pews. At the grocery store, people glanced my way like they'd read headlines about me somewhere. She kicked them out, you know. Her own son. After everything he's done for her. Funny how people never ask for the truth before choosing sides. I kept my head high through it all. Let them talk. Let them wonder. But late at night, lying awake with the house creaking around me, I felt the sting of it. Not the gossip. Not even Lila's threats. It was Daniel's silence. He didn't defend me. Didn't tell anyone about the porch, the humiliation, the way I'd sat outside listening to my own dinner table without me. Maybe pride kept him quiet. Maybe guilt. Either way, it hurt worse than the letter. On the 10th day, a second envelope came. This one was thicker. Mr. Whitaker read it at the table while I washed dishes. "They've filed an injunction," he said finally. "Trying to stop the eviction until a judge hears the case." I dried my hands slowly. "Will it work?" He smiled faintly. "Not with this trust. But it will drag things out. Make noise. That's what she wants, noise and mess." I nodded, staring out the window at the yard where Daniel once played catch with a scuffed-up baseball. "Then we'll fight," I said quietly. Because this house wasn't just wood and nails. It was every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every prayer whispered into cracked ceilings when money was short and hope was thin. I wouldn't let Lila turn it into a battlefield without a fight. And the first battle would be in court. As the sun set behind the trees that evening, painting the yard in gold, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear. Not anger. Resolve. Like the ground itself had shifted under my feet, but I was standing stronger than before. Lila wanted a war. Fame. But she was about to learn something about Evelyn Carter. I don't lose what I've bled to keep. If you're ready to see what happens when we face off in court, and the secrets that come out under oath, hit like, comment justice for Evelyn, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The courthouse in Maple Glen wasn't big. Just 2 brick stories with peeling white trim and a flag out front that snapped in the wind like it was impatient for justice. But that Monday morning, as I walked up the steps in my best navy blue dress, it felt like I was entering a cathedral. A place where words on paper could be louder than gossip, where truth could finally sit at the head of the table. Lila was already there, of course. Tight black suit, hair shining like she'd dipped it in gold. Heels clicking across the marble floor with all the confidence of someone certain the world was about to bend her way. Daniel walked 2 steps behind her, shoulders tense, face pale, like maybe he wasn't so sure anymore. And me. I walked in with Mr. Whitaker at my side. His briefcase swinging like a soldier carrying old but reliable weapons. Because that's what the papers inside were. Protection forged years ago when I first realized love doesn't always mean safety, not when property and pride start mixing like storm clouds. We sat at opposite tables. The judge came in, an older woman with sharp glasses and the kind of face that didn't care for nonsense. Case 24-106, the clerk read, Carter versus Carter. Hearing my own name split like that sent a sting through my chest. But I kept my back straight. Lila's cousin Rick stood first, slick as oil. "Your Honor, this is a clear case of emotional cruelty. My clients have lived in this residence for years. They've contributed financially, established it as their home, and now Mrs. Carter seeks to evict them out of spite." He said spite like it was poison dripping from his tongue. The judge turned to Mr. Whitaker. Response. Whitaker rose slowly, adjusting his glasses like he had all the time in the world. "Your Honor, the property in question is held in a living trust, executed and notarized 5 years ago. My client, Mrs. Evelyn Carter, retains full control and occupancy rights for the duration of her life. No payments have been made by the plaintiffs to constitute tenancy. This is not eviction. This is the end of permission." The judge looked over the paperwork as Rick tried to interrupt. "But they've invested in the home. With her money," Whitaker cut in smoothly. The judge raised a hand, silencing them both. "I see the trust is clear," she said after a moment. "Legally binding. Ironclad." She looked at Lila then, eyes sharp as a hawk. "Why are you here wasting the court's time if the documents leave no room for argument?" Lila flushed deep red under her foundation. "Because," she said tightly, Family shouldn't treat each other this way. Something in me cracked then. Not anger, not yet. Just the disbelief of a woman who'd spent her whole life bending over backward for people now painting themselves as victims. I stood slowly. "May I speak, Your Honor?" The judge nodded. I turned toward Lila, toward Daniel, toward the rows of curious townsfolk who'd come to watch because gossip travels faster than mail in Maple Glen. "Family," I said softly, "doesn't tell the woman who raised them to eat outside in her own home. Family doesn't turn the house bought with a widow's overtime shifts into a battlefield for pride. Family doesn't stay silent while the person who sacrificed everything for them is humiliated under her own roof." My voice didn't shake. Rang. Family, I finished, shows respect. And when it doesn't, family loses the privilege of living under the roof built with it. You could have heard a pin drop. The judge cleared her throat. "I see no legal standing for the plaintiffs," she said firmly. "The trust is valid. Mrs. Carter has full rights to the property. 30 days' notice stands." Her gavel cracked down like lightning splitting the sky. Case dismissed. Lila shot to her feet, fury rolling off her in waves. "This isn't over," she hissed, gathering her purse. But it was. At least legally. Because as we left the courthouse, as reporters from the local paper scribbled notes and townsfolk whispered behind hands, I knew Lila wasn't done. Some people don't know how to lose quietly. And sure enough, when we got home, the damage began. Furniture missing. Pictures off the walls. My late husband's tools dumped in a pile on the porch like trash. They were moving out already, but not before trying to gut the house of anything that wasn't nailed down. I stood in the doorway, watching Lila bark orders at the movers, Daniel carrying boxes with his jaw tight. Neither looked at me. Hurt. Not the furniture. Not the mess. The silence. The years of my life packed into cardboard without a word. I should have felt triumph after winning in court. Instead, as the sun sank behind the maple trees and my house echoed emptier than it had in decades, all I felt was the cold shadow of what comes after victory. Because winning doesn't always feel like you think it will. And something in Lila's eyes as she left told me the fight wasn't over. Not by a long shot. If you want to see what Lila does next, and how I find the strength to fight back one last time, hit like, comment, stay strong Evelyn, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The house was too quiet after they left. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful. More like the air after a storm when trees are still dripping and the sky looks bruised. Boxes were gone. Curtains missing. Half the dishes, the blender I bought last Christmas, even the framed photo of Daniel in his college cap, all vanished into Lila's moving truck like pieces of my own life disappearing down the road. I stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed tight around my ribs, staring at the empty nail where that photo used to hang. It wasn't about the blender or the curtains or even the old tools she tossed into the yard like junk. It was about erasure. About a woman who walked into my home years ago with polite smiles and casseroles, then slowly carved herself into the center of it until I was the one shoved to the edges. And Daniel. My Daniel carried boxes to the truck with his eyes on the ground like a boy doing chores he didn't want to do. Not once did he look at me. Not when Lila snapped at the movers. Not when she slammed the door of their SUV and drove off without saying goodbye. That silence weighed heavier than anything they stole. For the next few days, the house felt like a stranger wearing my walls. Too neat in places, too empty in others. I tried cooking one evening, but when I reached for my good skillet and remembered it was gone, I sat at the kitchen table and cried into my hands instead. I wasn't crying for the skillet. I was crying because I raised a son who let his wife treat me like I was temporary in the home where he was born. By the fourth day, a letter came. Not from lawyers this time. From the bank. My hands trembled just once opening it before I forced them still. The words inside hit like a punch I never saw coming. Notice of lien. My breath caught. Lila had taken out a line of credit months ago using Daniel's name, and apparently tried to tie this house to it before the court shut her down. She couldn't touch the trust, but she could make noise with the bank. Enough noise to drag my name through meetings and paperwork and long phone calls with men in gray suits who didn't care about family drama, only signatures and risk assessments. When I called Daniel, his voice cracked like a boy caught sneaking in after curfew. "I didn't know she did it," he said quickly. "She handled the finances." I thought, "Mom, I swear I didn't know." But he hadn't stopped her either. The bank froze the lien after Mr. Whitaker faxed them the trust papers, but the damage was done. The house was safe. My peace wasn't. Because the next day, paint appeared on my fence. 3 words in sloppy red letters. "Selfish old witch." Neighbors saw it before I did. By the time I stepped outside, Mrs. Henderson from 2 doors down was already scrubbing at it with a bucket of soapy water, muttering about no respect these days. I stood there on the grass, arms folded, watching suds drip downward slats while people slowed their cars to stare. Humiliation burns hotter when it's public. That night, lying awake with the window open to the chirp of crickets, I realized something. I wasn't scared of Lila anymore. I was tired. Tired of reacting. Tired of defending what was already mine. Tired of being quiet while someone else wrote the story of my life in red paint on my own fence. The next morning I called Mr. Whitaker. "I want to change the trust," I told him. "Add something." He cleared his throat. "Add what?" "A clause," I said, my voice steady now. "If Daniel doesn't live here by my invitation when I pass, the house goes somewhere else. Charity. Church. I don't care. But not to him. Not if he keeps letting her use him like this." There was a long pause on the line. Then, "I'll draw it up." Hurt. God, it hurt. But sometimes love has to hurt before it can heal. 3 days later, Daniel showed up alone. No Lila. No moving truck. Just him, standing on the porch where this whole thing started. "Mom," he said when I opened the door. His eyes were red. His voice cracked. "She left." I let him in. He told me everything over cold coffee at the kitchen table. How Lila had packed her things after the bank shut down her plans, after the court ruling, after the gossip in town got too loud even for her. "She said she never wanted to live in this house again," Daniel finished, rubbing his temples. "She said it was cursed." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. 'Cause maybe she was right. Maybe it was cursed for people who didn't understand what it cost to keep it. Daniel looked at me then, eyes raw. "I'm sorry, Mom. For all of it." I wanted to stay angry. But he was still my son. And he looked so small sitting there in the kitchen where I once taught him how to count using sugar packets and coffee spoons. So I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. "We start over," I said softly. "But on my terms this time. Because this house would have peace again. Even if I had to build it from the ruins Lila left behind. If you want to see how I rebuild my life, and what final surprise Lila leaves behind, hit like, comment Evelyn Rises, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter." Daniel stayed in the guest room that night. The same room Lila had once filled with perfume bottles, hairdryers, and clothes she ordered online but never wore. Now it was quiet again, the way it used to be before ambition and cruelty started dripping into the corners of my house like a slow leak. I lay awake in my own room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows on the plaster, thinking about how fast a life can turn. 1 minute you're baking lemon pie for Sunday dinner, the next you're scrubbing hate words off your fence while your son's marriage burns to ashes. The next morning, Daniel brewed coffee before I even came downstairs. He set a mug in front of me like a peace offering. "I've been talking to a realtor," he said softly, "about finding my own place." I sipped the coffee, watching him over the rim. He looked older these days, like the last few weeks had carved lines into his face that wouldn't smooth out easy. "That's a good idea," I said finally. He nodded. "I don't want to stay here just because I have nowhere else to go. I want it to be your house again. My house again." The words hit deep. Because even though the court had given it back to me on paper, it hadn't felt like mine since the night I sat on the porch with dinner on my lap while laughter spilled from a table I set with my own hands. I wanted to believe things could go back. But then the 3rd letter came. It was waiting in the mailbox after lunch, thick envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words typed in bold black ink. Check the county records. No signature. No explanation. My stomach dropped. Mr. Whitaker drove straight to the county clerk's office that afternoon. When he came back, his jaw was tight, the way people's jaws get when they're holding words behind their teeth because they don't want them to break loose too fast. She tried again, he said, handing me the file. Filed paperwork last week claiming half ownership of the property. Said there was a verbal agreement between you, her, and Daniel. My chest burned. Verbal agreement. He nodded grimly. Complete fabrication. It won't hold in court, but she's trying to muddy the waters. If anything happened to you suddenly, it could tie things up for months. I sat down hard at the kitchen table, the same spot where all of this began, where Lila once told me to eat outside because I didn't fit the picture she wanted to paint for her dinner guests. Only now it wasn't about humiliation. It was about legacy. And she wasn't done clawing at it. Daniel paced the room like a man whose own mistakes were chasing him. I'll handle it, he said quickly. I'll talk to her. But talk wouldn't fix this. I looked at Mr. Whitaker. What do? We lock it down tighter than before, he said simply. No loopholes. No gray areas. We amend the trust again, file additional protections. So if she tries this a 4th time, the paperwork will laugh her out of the building. So that's what we did. For the next week, I signed more papers than I had in the last 5 years. Everything notarized, witnessed, filed twice over. If I sneezed, the trust probably covered it now. But at night, when the house went quiet, I kept hearing Lila's voice in my head. She said she never wanted to live in this house again. People like her didn't walk away empty-handed. And sure enough, the last surprise came 2 weeks later. A neighbor knocked on my door holding an envelope that had been stuck under his windshield wiper. Same thick paper. Same black letters. Inside was a photo of me, taken through my own kitchen window while I washed dishes the night before. No note this time. No words. Just proof someone had been standing in my yard after dark with a camera. Daniel wanted to call the police immediately. Mr. Whitaker said we should install cameras, change the locks, maybe even get a restraining order. But I just sat there holding that photo, my hand steady even though my heart wasn't. Because this wasn't about a house anymore. It was about fear. And I was too old, too tired, too done to live scared in the home I built with my own 2 hands. So I made a decision right there at the kitchen table, one that would end this war once and for all. The kind of decision you don't announce with anger or noise. The kind that happens quiet as a door closing for the last time. If you want to see the final move I make, and how I end this battle on my terms, hit like, comment Evelyn's Last Stand, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter. The next morning I woke up before the sun. The house was still, the kind of stillness that lets you hear your own heartbeat. I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad and pen, the photo from the envelope lying beside me like a dare. Someone had stood in my yard, watching me through my own window. Lila or someone she sent. It didn't matter. Because today I was ending this. Daniel came in, hair messy from sleep, and froze when he saw the notepad. Mom, he said carefully. What are you doing? Making sure this house never falls into the wrong hands again, I said. My voice didn't shake. Not yours. Not hers. Not anyone who doesn't understand what it costs to keep it standing. He sat across from me, shoulders slumping. You think I don't care? I looked at him, my only child. Grown now but carrying the same eyes he had at 5 when he begged for one more bedtime story. I think, I said softly, you forgot who built this life while you were busy building yours. His mouth opened then closed. No excuses came. By 8 a.m. Mr. Whitaker was at the door, briefcase in hand. I drew up the papers, he said simply. We drove to the county clerk's office together. The sun was bright, but the air carried the bite of coming autumn. Maple leaves skittered across the courthouse steps like they wanted to witness what was about to happen. Inside, under buzzing fluorescent lights, I signed my name more times than I can count. Each signature felt like laying bricks in a wall no one would climb again. The house would go to a women's shelter foundation after I passed. A place for single mothers starting over. For women like me decades ago when I was scraping by on cafeteria wages and prayers. Not to Daniel. Not to Lila. To women who would understand what walls and a roof can mean when the world feels like it's caving in. When I set the pen down for the last time, Mr. Whitaker nodded. It's done. Ironclad. No one can touch it now. I felt lighter walking out than I had in months. Maybe years. But peace doesn't come easy when someone like Lila is circling. That evening, just as the sky turned orange behind the trees, a car pulled into the driveway. Not Daniel's. Lila stepped out. She didn't slam doors this time. Didn't storm up the walk like before. She moved slow, deliberate, heels crunching on the gravel until she stood at the bottom of the porch steps where I waited. You changed the trust, she said flatly. Yes. You're giving it away. To strangers. To women who need it, I corrected. Her jaw tightened. Out of spite. I shook my head. Out of love. For this house. For what it stands for. I won't let it be a trophy in someone else's game. For the first time since I'd known her, Lila looked small. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just small. You ruined Daniel's life, she said finally. No, I said softly. I gave him one. What he does with it now is his choice. She stared at me for a long moment, eyes cold, then turned and walked back to her car without another word. But I knew this wasn't the last I'd see of her. Because people like Lila don't fade out quiet. And I could feel something building, the way you feel thunder before the sky splits open. The final strike was coming. I just didn't know when. Or how hard it would hit. If you want to see how this ends, and what Lila does in her last desperate move, hit like, comment, finish it, Evelyn, and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter, the powerful conclusion. The days after Lila's visit felt like the air before a tornado. Too still, too bright, like the world was holding its breath. Daniel stayed in the guest room, quieter than he'd ever been in his life. He cooked dinner once, cleaned the gutters without me asking, even fixed the back porch light that had flickered for months. But I knew what he was really doing. Trying to make up for silence. For all the nights I'd sat at this kitchen table alone while he let Lila turn my house into a place where I was a guest instead of a mother. On the 6th day it happened. I was sweeping the living room when tires screeched in the driveway. A door slammed hard enough to shake the windows. Lila stormed up the steps, face flushed, eyes wild. She carried a manila envelope in one hand, crumpled like she'd been gripping it too tight the whole drive over. Daniel met her on the porch. Lila, don't. She shoved past him, straight into my living room. This, she snapped, slamming the envelope down on the coffee table, is my final offer. Sign the house over to Daniel. Keep your precious name on it while you're alive if you want, but make sure it passes to him when you're gone. Otherwise... I didn't even touch the envelope. Otherwise what? She leaned in close, voice dropping to a hiss. Otherwise, I tell everyone in this town exactly what kind of mother you really were. How you drove your husband into the grave with your nagging. How you controlled Daniel's whole life until he could barely breathe without your permission. How you... Stop. The word came from Daniel. Lila froze. He stepped forward, shoulders squared, voice steady for the first time in weeks. That's enough, Lila. She blinked like she hadn't heard him right. Excuse me. You heard me, he said. You've humiliated my mother, trashed this house, lied to banks, filed fake claims, and now you want to blackmail her? Her face twisted. I'm fighting for what's ours. It was never yours, he shot back. And it's not mine either. Not anymore. He turned to me then, eyes clear, voice cracking just a little. Mom, do what you want with the house. Give it away. Burn it down. I don't care. I just want you to have peace. For a moment no one moved. Then Lila laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Peace. You think she cares about peace? She wants control. She's always wanted control. Daniel didn't even look at her. Get out, Lila. Her mouth fell open. What? You heard me. he said again, voice like iron now. Get out. She looked between us, waiting for someone to back down. Neither of us did. Finally, with a strangled sound that was half scream, half sob, she grabbed the envelope, shoved it under her arm and stormed out. Her car tore down the road, tires spitting gravel like curses. And just like that she was gone. Daniel sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. I should have stopped her a long time ago, he said. I sat beside him, resting a hand on his shoulder. You stopped her now. That's what matters. We sat there a long time in the quiet house, the autumn light slanting through the windows, dust motes drifting in the air like tiny pieces of peace finally settling. 2 weeks later, Daniel moved into a small apartment across town. He came by every Sunday for dinner. No lawyers, no shouting, no Lila. The house was mine again, not just on paper, in spirit. I planted marigolds along the front walk in the spring, painted the fence white again, hung new curtains in the windows. And when people in town whispered about the drama, I just smiled. Let them talk. Because for the first time in years, the house felt like home. Not a battlefield. Not a prize. And when the day comes that I leave this world behind, it won't go to Daniel or Lila, or anyone who ever saw it as something to fight over. It will shelter women who need safety more than ownership. Women who understand what it means to fight for walls that keep out the cold. The war was over, and I had won. Not by force, by choosing peace, by choosing where the story ends. If Evelyn's journey moved you, hit like, comment respect for Evelyn, and subscribe for more powerful stories that prove it's never too late to take back your life.